Welcome to the Hirewell Recruiting Insights podcast. I'm your host, James Hornick, partner at Hirewell. Today, I'm joined by a special guest, the Diversity and Learning and Development Lead at FCB Chicago, Courtney Henderson.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thanks for coming. I always, we met, was it a month back or a month and a half back or something like that? And I always try to meet everyone that I have on as a guest, beforehand, just to make sure we're on the same page and things we want to talk about and whatnot. And I think that, I think we plan on meeting for a half hour. We end up meeting for like an hour and 15 minutes. We realized like we could do a podcast for 3 hours if we wanted to. So diversity and inclusion is such an interesting space, and you have so much kind of a knowledge and background in it. And I think to kick us off, like give everyone. So what we want to talk about today is really kind of how to initiate or how to implement a diversity and inclusion initiative of your company. And Courtney's obviously a wealth of knowledge there, but introduce yourself in terms of like what your background is, what you do at FCB Chicago, a little bit about FCB Chicago. Just so everyone has some context.
Yeah, of course. So FCB Chicago, we are a full-service advertising agency. We're global, so we have about 10,000 employees at a global level. I specifically work for our Chicago office. In our Chicago office, we usually have about like 750 people. So the work that I focus on with diversity and inclusion mainly affects our Chicago office, but I also partner with our global team that's headquartered in New York on efforts there too. So I started off more on the business side in advertising. So I actually worked with clients pretty closely, specifically on our KFC team. And I've always had a passion for diversity and inclusion. So even though I was making or helping to produce KFC ads, I ended up always working and partnering with HR and trying to find a way that we can increase representation, specifically people of color within our advertising industry. And from there, it kind of catapulted into HR kind of recruited me into HR, and I worked in recruiting for a little bit as well as diversity and inclusion, and now my role that I do now is focused mainly on diversity and inclusion, and then I also play in the learning and development space too.
Okay. I think that the one thing I want to start with first off, because this is extremely basic. We talk to companies all the time who are, this is on the forefront of their mind, or maybe they're really good in this space and they've done a lot of work, or maybe they're thinking about doing it, but there's still some that like, they know it's important, they just can't they don't quite get it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I thought it might make sense if we first start like, why is this an important thing for companies to focus on? How does it affect their business deliverables? And especially like, I know what your answer is going to be for some of this. What you guys do, it's very easy to understand in terms of like the direct impact. So
So I think for us, what you were talking about, we do and produce a lot of different advertisements, and our audiences that we're producing those advertisements for usually are a diverse community within itself. So it helps us to have a diverse representation inside of our walls, so that it just helps us dig into the cultural insights a little bit better. But if you are a company outside of advertising and you might be wondering, why is diversity important? Why is representation important? I think it was a McKinsey report a few years back that did some studies. 35% in terms of financial gain is seen when you focus on increasing representation of people of color. You see the same financial gains at 15% when you focus on gender, specifically bringing in more females into your organization. So that alone, just getting to a better bottom line is a great reason to focus on diversity. But outside of that, it's just the right thing to do. Like, you want everybody in your organization to have a voice, to feel like they belong. You don't want them to feel marginalized. You want everybody to have a fair opportunity. So if nothing else, like, it's the right thing to focus on.
Absolutely. And I guess that kind of dovetails into one of the first things I want to kind of talk about is like, there's a lot you can focus on.
Yes.
I think that some people don't realize just how broad the field is. There's so many different aspects of it. And I think even companies that do well, they know they have more to do because it's just like the amount of people that need to be included in different types of backgrounds. But so let's talk about that a little bit. Like how do you decide what to focus on? Like what has been your focus at FCB so far, and kind of how do you pick your spots? I guess.
It's a wide variety of things to choose from. I usually tell people to get a good sense of what your culture is currently like, what the atmosphere is, and what's needed. So we have what we call a Climate for Inclusion survey, and it basically is an employee survey, and they can answer questions about how they feel in terms of fair treatment at our current company. They can offer guidance in terms of what they would like to see. They talk about our leadership, our managers, and how they feel like fair treatment is dealt from them. And that's a huge guide for us to figure out what we need to focus on next, and to break things into smaller pieces that are a little bit more manageable. A lot of companies will focus on recruiting efforts first. I think when we first started to really take a deep dive into diversity and inclusion, that's where we started. Recruiting can get to some, fast results, but there's also some internal things and aspects that you can focus on as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense too, because I've seen companies with that too, where they want to become more diverse. They focus on recruiting, but is your workplace suitable as is for people to attract people who are, come from different types of backgrounds and whatnot, and also not having an idea of where your gaps are.
Yes.
If you don't know where that is first and what you need to work on, it's you're kind of just chasing your tail, or maybe focusing on the wrong things, or whatnot. So, and that was one of the things. Anything, I guess, in particular, I want to ask, like, what's maybe more of an anecdote about what you've done so far? Like, do you have any examples, like big gains you've made or accomplishments you guys are so far, just in terms of moving the needle a little bit in different areas?
Yeah, so a few years back, we really focused on females and getting better representation of females, specifically in one of our departments. So we have a department that focuses on hiring creatives. They're the ones that are actually producing and thinking up the different creative ideas. So we wanted to get stronger female representation, specifically among leadership within creative, and then leadership all around as well. We've done a really good job. We still focus on it, but we have about 60% female representation, which is huge for us. And you can definitely feel the impact. We actually just had some leadership changes, and our president is now a female for the Chicago office. So we're really excited about that. Her style will be very different, but I think that it's adding a fresh perspective to how we look at work and how we look at how to address diversity from an internal standpoint as well. So that's been a really good gain for us. Right now, we're focusing a little bit more on people of color and how to increase representation and also foster a more inclusive environment for people of color. So we've done a pretty good job in terms of making strides about representation. Like, if you walked into our office a year and a half or 2 years ago versus walking into it today, there's definitely a difference. You see that. So we're still working. We still have work to do on increasing that representation, but also trying to hone it a little bit more on the inclusion piece and focusing on some internal efforts to help retain the talent that we have hired in and help them grow within the organization.
Okay. Tell us more about that, because that's one thing I want to talk about too, because retention is such a huge piece where I think, I don't want to go off on a side tangent, but I've talked to a lot of business leaders recently, and I'm finding that the way to recruit people is to do a better job of retaining people, because it's easier when you can spend all this time on employer brand and your messaging and you're recruiting all these types of things, but when your employees who aren't involved in the interview process say nothing but good things because they're genuinely happy, that's the best recruiting tool you can possibly have. Yeah. So I'm curious, guys. So from a retention standpoint, you mentioned kind of that you're doing the surveys, employee surveys, as kind of baseline. Yeah. What else kind of goes into it?
Yeah. I think that the survey helps a lot, and having somebody that's talking to the people and understanding what are some of the challenges that people are facing. We also have an internal organization that focuses on diversity as well and inclusion. So it's the equivalent. A lot of companies will have business resource groups or employee resource groups, BRGs or ERGs. We have more of a diverse council. So it has about 65 or so employees right now, which is relatively large for our office. And it makes up a plethora of different backgrounds of people, and their focus is to produce content for our organization that's going to foster inclusivity, and they also help build more education. So for Black History Month, they produced a program to help people understand a little bit about the history of Black people in America and to help people celebrate. So it was that was a huge effort. So they'll usually do things like that, and I work very closely with them on helping them understand, where are our gaps within FCB in Chicago office and how they can help fill some of those gaps as well.
Okay. 65 is a lot. I was just thinking, here's a lot of people.
It's like a whole nother
How big is the
team.
office in general, in total?
It's about 750 people.
So just under 10% of the company is involved. And that's awesome.
That's our largest number that we've had to date. The co-leads for the organization has done a phenomenal job. And that organization within itself, it has different pillars. So then you have different leads that focus on different things. So not everybody is trying to do the same thing. It's something that employees do above and beyond their day-to-day job. So we appreciate their efforts.
I think it's great. Like I've talked to a lot of companies, not in this space particular, but more generally, giving employees an opportunity to do things outside their day-to-day job just fosters so much like intellectual growth, so much kind of expanding their horizons and feeling like they're not just kind of pigeonholed, but especially when it's like something that's this important, something they're passionate about, and the fact you have that many people, because it's voluntary, I assume. So it's like it's like one of those things where that's impressive. So.
Yeah, they've done a great job, and I do think that helps a lot with retention because you're giving people the power to start working on the change that they want to see. So I think that that's a really important element. And you're also giving people a platform for their voices to be heard. So leadership spends a lot of time talking to them, not only the leadership in our Chicago office, but we have a lot of conversations with our global leadership as well. They come to Chicago and they sit down with our diversity council and talk to them a little bit to get a better understanding of what some of the challenges are and how it can be fixed.
Okay. From a retention standpoint, kind of staying on this topic, and this is one thing I want to make sure we're as podcasters, where you're like, so I know a lot of companies that they're not doing anything in this space. They want to, they just don't know how. They don't know where to start. So if you were to, you're not leaving FCB, but if you were to walk into a new company that's smaller, that's done nothing, what are the first couple things you would do in terms of just getting a baseline started in terms of what they can focus on?
I like data. I think that it's really important to understand where you currently are in order to make a move of where you should go next. So the way that I usually would start or would recommend somebody to start is to look at what your current status is in terms of understanding your gap. And you don't have to do a full company-wide survey in order to get there. It's just a lot of times working with HR, understanding what the representation looks like across the different demographics that you do currently measure, and gaining an understanding of what are the industry standards, how far behind are you on par, are you ahead, to understand the areas that you should focus on. And then I always think it's important to talk to the people face to face and get an understanding of, what are they struggling with, what would they like to see, and those can be done in a group effort or one-on-one with different people. And from there, I think that a plan becomes pretty obvious in terms of what's a first priority, and then trickling down from there.
Okay, I'm gonna give a plug to a partner of ours because it directly relates to what you're mentioning. So we work with a company here in Chicago called Holistic, and the data piece is exactly what they specialize in. So they actually work with companies. They do surveys of their current employees, get whatever data they have, and actually piece together plans where the gaps are. So when they recommend things to focus on, it's actually based upon real data that's actionable, as opposed to just making up, you should do this and that, which I think is one of the, I don't want to say one of the issues, but it can be an issue if you're not focused in the right areas. So check out Holistic, or hit me up if I can always give you their details. So anyways, so let's talk about recruiting, because that's ultimately what we always tie things back to onboarding people and whatnot. So, and you were doing some interesting things that I honestly had never heard of before in this space. You know what I mean? So, and when we were talking before, so I'd love to kind of talk about that more now, but so you've gotten to the point where you're hypothetically, you're at the point where you're comfortable, you're doing a lot with retention, you've created an inclusive environment, you've done all those kind of things. You're at the point now where you want to start, recruiting more people from more diverse backgrounds. How do you go about that exactly? Or what tricks do you have, I guess?
Yeah. So when our recruiting team decided that we wanted to focus more on inclusive recruiting efforts, we knew that we had to make some drastic changes to our process and like how we're sourcing from talent. A lot of the people that we hire, sometimes they do come from referrals. And while referrals are always great, what ends up happening is a lot of people are referring people that are like them.
Yeah.
So sometimes it can work against you when you are trying to diversify a workforce. So you have to break that process down a little bit and also break down the process of if your recruiting team is always going to the same sourcing strategies and using the same sourcing methods.
Yeah.
I'm breaking that process down a little bit to make it more inclusive of others. Again, with recruiting, I started with the data. So for looking at FCB specifically, we wanted to look at increasing people of color. And so in order to do that, I started to look at the people of color that we currently had within the building and trying to figure out what their career path was, how they heard about job opportunities. And then trying to expand our sourcing pipeline. So before we actually introduced any changes to our recruiting process, we did all of that legwork, that research. The recruiters and I worked very hard on figuring out different sourcing pools that we could find talent from. And then we launched to the agency a new idea or a new strategy for how we were going to recruit talent.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can say firsthand, as someone who's worked with tons of recruiters over the years, like we're creatures of habit. Yeah. Once you find one sourcing method that works, you just keep going to the well until. And I've never been internal, but I can see the same thing like with employee referrals. And I'm the first one to say employee referrals are the best way to hire, but you have to be aware there are limitations to them. From various aspects. And one of them obviously is it's the more you rely on them, the more you're just going to get people with typically the same background. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Were there any? I'm trying to think. Any groups? You threw out a couple to me. I thought it was interesting. But what groups you went to find some of these? I know you built some relationships with like some local community groups. Is what I'm getting to.
Yeah. So I think that's really important too. Word of mouth is really big for a lot of different diversity groups. And a lot of times you do have to build relationships and partnerships with different local communities. No matter which industry you work in, there's always going to be local communities or groups that are built for different diversity groups. So if you take people of color, there are a lot of different groups, even in finance, that have groups that are focused on people of color within the finance industry. So finding out who those groups are and building a relationship with the leads is highly important. We have some very strong relationships with some local groups within the advertising industry, and it allows us the opportunity to let them know when opportunities come up for us, and then they can help us get the word out to their larger community, and it helps us expand our sourcing for how we're sourcing for candidates, and to help us just make our pipelines a little bit more inclusive than what they have been in the past.
What's next for you guys in terms of we kind of talked before about there's always different areas to focus on. So you mentioned like in terms of like based upon gender, you're really good space there. Yeah. What other things do you want to like? Everyone has limited time and resources. So you have to pick your spots. This is kind of what we're focused on now. Yeah. What things do you want to get to in the future? Because I think it's important to kind of mention like all the other aspects that maybe you're going to get to, but it hasn't gotten there yet.
So I'm really excited. We're focusing on people with disabilities right now. So we're just in the beginning stages, and it came from somebody in our agency, was very passionate about the space and came to me, and we had a really great conversation. And it's an area of opportunity because there's so many people with disabilities that are lacking job opportunities because companies are dismissing them pretty quickly within the hiring pipeline and process. So we work together. We're working together now to build out a plan for how we can get better representation. We're starting with education. I think when you look at people with disabilities, it's a large community, and a lot of people don't understand it, and they don't understand that there's so much diversity just within that group. Yeah. So we're starting with some education, so our people can understand just how diverse that group is, to understand just the right words to use and phrases and things like that, and then we'll move into the recruiting space after that to see some better representation. So it's something that's probably going to take us a couple of years to get to see some real actual results, but I'm really, really excited about that next opportunity.
And I'm glad you brought that up too, because I think it's this one thing where it takes a while to make your company more diverse, no matter where you are. It's a long process, but you just have to start somewhere, and it's something that's never going to be complete. You're never going to be at, you're never going to achieve the level of, across the board in all areas we feel good. But I think it's okay if you're not great in some areas, as long as you have a genuine intention to focus on that going forward. So.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think being intentional is really, really key when you're thinking about the diversity space, as long as you need to be doing something. Otherwise, you're already years behind. So I agree with you. You just have to start somewhere. And I always say, start with the low-hanging fruit. There's always low-hanging fruit. If you want to see some results, start there and then just build off of that.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to talk about today? We kind of covered a lot. So.
Yeah, we did cover a lot. I can talk about this all day long.
I know.
I will say this, because I don't know if it's talked about a lot, but I think the work within diversity and inclusion, it's really important work, but sometimes it can get a little emotionally taxing and draining and tough. And so what I usually tell people that want to focus within this space is that there are going to be days that it is challenging, where it is tough, and making sure that you're building your community around you of supporters that believe in the philosophy of better representation and diversity overall. That's going to fight and push right alongside you, because I think that's really important. And the other thing that I would say is it's really important to meet people where they are within their diversity journey. Everybody is in a different place. So you have to find out what's important to them, what speaks to them. Is it the business? Is it more so from an emotional standpoint? And then figure out how to get your way in, because half the battle is just selling something in for programming for diversity and inclusion.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. I think that, unless there's anything else, we're pretty set on this one for this week. So I appreciate your time. I think it's been a great discussion. I read this very sloppily, the outro text for our podcast every week. So thanks everyone for listening to Hirewell's Recruiting Insights podcast. If you like what you heard and want more insights from our recruiting experts, visit hirewell.com/recruiting-insights. And remember to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Courtney Henderson, thank you once again for stopping by today.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And everyone out there, we'll see you soon.